Prologue. Some men don't break your heart loudly, they just love the smaller version of you, the one that fits quietly into their life, and call it enough. Jane Okafor had spent 4 years being finished with Marcus Adebayo. Then his name lit up her phone at 11:47 p.m. in a hotel room in Seoul. And somewhere across the city, a man with ink on his hands was already changing what she thought she deserved. If you're new here, subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss what's coming. Let's get into it. Jane had looked at the notification 11 times without opening it. She knew because she had counted, the way she counted brushstrokes in a painting when she needed something to hold on to. 11 times she had picked up her phone. 11 times she had put it back down. Marcus Adebayo, 11:47 p.m. That was all the preview showed. His name and the time. Everything else was waiting behind a tap she had not yet decided to make. She stood at the hotel window in the early morning, Seoul gray and quiet below her, the Han River barely visible through a thin mist. She had slept 4 hours. She had spent the other 3 thinking about an unopened message, and a man she had finished with so carefully 4 years ago that she'd almost convinced herself it had never happened at all. Almost. The thing about Marcus was that he had never been cruel. That would have been easier. Cruel men were simple. You identified the damage, you left, you healed. Marcus had been warm and attentive, and genuinely interested in her in a way that had felt, at 28, like finally being seen. It had taken her 18 months to understand that what he was interested in was the version of her that fit quietly into his life, not the full one. Not the one that took up space and had opinions and needed to be reckoned with. She had ended it on a Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop in Atlanta. He had not argued. That had told her everything she needed to know. She picked up the phone. She opened the message. Jane, I know this isn't fair. I know you have every reason to ignore this, but I need to talk to you before the engagement party on Saturday. Not about us. There is no us, I understand that. About Harper. There are things she doesn't know. Things I should have told her a long time ago. I think you deserve to hear them first. Marcus. Jane read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the windowsill and stood very still, watching the mist move over the river. She thought about Harper's voice in the gallery bathroom. Some people build the life they deserve. She thought about the way Marcus had looked at her across the room last night. Not with longing, she understood now, but with the particular guilt of a man carrying something too heavy for too long. She picked the phone back up. 1 hour. The cafe at Gyeongbokgung. 10 a.m. Don't make me regret this. She sent it before she could change her mind. Then she showered, dressed, burnt orange coat, hair down today, loose and full around her face, and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about Siwan. They were meeting at the Liam at noon. She would deal with Marcus first. She would deal with whatever he was carrying. And then she would walk into that museum and stand next to a man who had looked at her like she was the clearest thing in the room, and she would not let one have anything to do with the other. She was good at compartmentalizing. She'd been doing it her whole life. Her phone lit up. A message from an unsaved number. A driver confirming her noon pickup for the Liam. Below it, another notification. Harper. We need to talk before Saturday. Call me. Jane put the phone in her bag. She would call Harper after Marcus, after the Liam, after she understood what she was actually dealing with. Outside, Seoul was waking up, the streets filling slowly, the mist beginning to lift, the city reassembling itself into its daytime version. Jane watched it from the window for another moment, her full figure reflected faintly in the glass, her face steady. She had spent 4 years being finished with Marcus. She was about to find out if that was true. The Liam Museum of Art sat on a hillside in Hanam-dong, like something that had decided it did not need to impress anyone. Jane had been inside twice before, both times during public hours, both times moving through galleries that were extraordinary, and also somehow not quite enough, like being shown the front rooms of a house, and told the rest was private. She had always suspected the private collection was where the real conversation lived. She was right. Siwan was already there when she arrived, standing near the entrance with the director, a small, precise man in his 60s, who shook Jane's hand and looked at her credentials with the focused attention of someone who had spent a lifetime deciding what deserved his time. Whatever he found, he nodded once and led them both through a door that required a keycard and a code. The storage collection was housed in 3 climate-controlled rooms below the main building. Jane walked into the first one and stopped breathing for a moment. 43 pieces, she would later count. Most of them had not been seen outside this room in over a decade. Some had not been catalogued properly since acquisition. 1. A large landscape in the back corner, half covered by a protective cloth, made her chest tighten the moment she uncovered it. "This shouldn't be in storage," she said. Siwan came to stand beside her. He had worn dark clothing again today, the neck tattoo visible above his collar, his hands, ink across the knuckles, clasped loosely behind his back as he studied the piece. The previous director had specific opinions about what belonged on the walls. The previous director was wrong. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. You say that very easily. It's a very easy thing to say. They worked through the first room methodically, Jane assessing, Siwan asking questions that were increasingly less about the art and increasingly about her. Not intrusively, the way someone leaned closer to a painting when they had decided it was worth the distance. "You came from somewhere this morning," he said at one point. Not a question. He had noticed something in her face that she had thought she had put away. Jane glanced at him. "You're observant. You catalog what people are trying not to show," he said. "So do I." She held his gaze for a moment. "Someone I used to know wanted to talk. I met them. It's handled. Is it?" The question sat in the air between them, clean and direct and without pressure. Jane turned back to the landscape. "Not entirely," she said. "But it will be." Siwan did not push. By the time they reached the third room, the director had excused himself and left them alone with the collection. The room was cooler than the others, the lighting precise and low. Jane had been moving through it for several minutes when she stopped in front of a small portrait near the far wall, a woman in 3/4 profile, the brushwork loose and intimate, clearly painted by someone who knew her. She leaned closer. Behind her, she heard Siwan move. He stopped just behind her left shoulder, not touching, present in the particular way he was always present, quietly, without announcement, as though he had simply decided this was where he was meant to be. "The light source is behind her," Jane said, "but her face is fully lit." He painted her the way he saw her, not the way the room actually was. "He loved her," Siwan said. "Yes," Jane said. "You can always tell." A beat of silence. Then she felt it. His hand, light and unhurried, lifting a single loose strand of her natural hair that had fallen forward across her cheek and moving it back, tucking it gently behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her jaw, a breath of contact, there and gone. Jane went very still. She did not turn around. She stayed exactly where she was, looking at the portrait of the woman who had been painted by someone who loved her, and she felt the warmth of him standing just behind her left shoulder, like a fact that had been quietly true for days, and was only now being said aloud. "You were going to miss something," he said, calm, unhurried, as though his heart was not doing what hers was doing. Jane turned her head slowly until she could see his face. He was looking at the painting, but the corner of his mouth had moved in that way it moved. The way she had catalogued from the first day in the museum. The way she had come to understand meant more than it showed. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked at her then. Direct, certain, close. "Don't thank me," he said. Jane faced forward again, the portrait. The woman fully lit in a dark room, painted exactly as someone had seen her. She understood it differently than she had 30 seconds ago. They stayed in the third room another 40 minutes. Neither of them mentioned what had happened. Neither of them needed to. It sat between them for the rest of the afternoon, like something that had been carefully placed and was not going anywhere. When they finally emerged into the Itaewon evening, Siwan's jacket was back on, the sleeve covered, the neck tattoo the only visible ink. He walked beside her toward the car with the same unhurried certainty he carried everywhere. At the door he paused. "Dinner," he said. Not a question. "Dinner," Jane agreed. His mother would have loved this room, she had been about to say. She said it now, quietly, as the car pulled away from the Liam. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. She would have... Jane looked at him, at the stillness in his face when he said it, the particular quality of a grief that had been lived with long enough to become part of the architecture. Tell me about her, she said. He looked up. Jane held his gaze. You don't have to, but I'd like to know. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he began to talk. Jane listened the way she looked at paintings, completely without rushing to the next thing. When he finished, the car was pulling into Itaewon, and the city was lit and loud outside the windows, and the interior was very quiet. She sounds like someone who deserved more room, Jane said. Yes, Siwan said. She did. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one that lived between recognition and something she did not yet have a name for. Jane looked back at him, and did not look away. The cafe near Gyeongbokgung had been Jane's choice. Public, neutral, the kind of place where nothing could become more than it was. Marcus had arrived before her. He was sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, looking like a man who had not slept. He stood when he saw her. She waved him back down. She sat across from him and ordered tea and looked at him the way she looked at everything, steadily, without performance. He had aged well, which she noted without feeling anything in particular about it. Same broad shoulders, same easy smile that had once disarmed her completely. The smile wasn't present this morning. Thank you for coming, he said. You said it was about Harper, Jane said. So talk. He looked down at his cup, then up. Before Harper and I got together, you know the timeline, you know it overlapped. Jane said nothing. I told her we met after you and I ended, Marcus said. That wasn't true. There were 2 months where He stopped. I was still calling you, still trying to convince you to change your mind. And Harper and I had already started. Jane looked at him. She doesn't know, he said. She has never known, and I have spent 3 years telling myself it didn't matter because you and I were finished and Harper never needed to be hurt by something that was already over. He exhaled. But standing in that gallery last night, watching you, I understood that I had been lying to myself. It does matter. She deserves to know before she marries me. Why are you telling me first? Jane asked. Because it affects you too, he said. And because I owe you that. Jane wrapped both hands around her tea. She thought about Harper's voice. Some people build the life they deserve. She thought about the 3 years she had carried this secret, certain it was the kindest thing, certain that silence protected everyone. You need to tell her, Jane said. Before Saturday. Not because I'm asking you to. Because you're right. She deserves to know who she's marrying. Marcus nodded slowly. And Marcus, Jane said, whatever happens after you tell her, that is between you and Harper. I am not part of it. I haven't been for 4 years. I know, he said quietly. Jane stood. She picked up her coat, her bag, her composure. She was at the door when she heard her name. She turned. Are you happy? Marcus asked, not with longing, with something that looked, finally, like genuine concern. Here, in Seoul, whatever is happening with. Yes, Jane said simply. She walked out into the Seoul morning. She did not look back. What she did not see, as she turned onto the main street, was the figure standing 30 meters away, half obscured, by the entrance of a convenience store, phone already raised. One of Harper's friends. The younger one. The one who had said, "Don't you feel bad? She's your sister." She had seen everything. Siwan heard it at dinner. He had taken Jane to a restaurant in Itaewon. Small, quiet, the kind of place that required knowing someone to find it. They had been there an hour, deep in a conversation about the misattributed landscape and whether it was worth pursuing a formal provenance investigation, when his phone lit up. He glanced at it, a message from a contact he recognized, someone adjacent to the gallery circuit, someone who collected information the way others collected art. A photo. 2 people at a cafe table near Gyeongbokgung. Jane and a man. The message beneath it contained 3 sentences, and Marcus Adebayo's full name. Siwan looked at the photo for a long moment. Then he put the phone face down on the table. Jane had seen his expression shift. She was watching him carefully now, the way she watched things she was trying to understand before she committed to an interpretation. "Someone sent you something," she said. It wasn't a question. Siwan looked at her. "A photo. You and a man at a cafe this morning. Someone has connected it to Harper's fiancé and is apparently very interested in whether I know." The table was very quiet. Jane held his gaze. She did not look away, did not deflect, did not reach for an explanation before she had given him the full truth. She told him. All of it. The history with Marcus, the silence she had chosen, the message last night, the cafe this morning, what Marcus had told her, what she had told him. She said it plainly, the way she said everything, without softening it. When she finished, Siwan said nothing for a moment. "You've been carrying that for 4 years, he said finally. "Yes. Alone." It felt like the right thing. He looked at her with that expression she had learned over 4 days, the one that meant he was seeing past what was being shown to what was actually there. "It wasn't yours to carry," he said. "It was his." Jane felt something loosen in her chest. "I know that now." Siwan picked up his phone. He looked at the message one more time, then set it back down. "Whoever sent this is hoping it creates a problem. Will it?" He looked at her across the table, at the full, beautiful, completely composed woman who had told him a difficult truth without flinching, and was now waiting for his verdict, with the steady patience of someone who had learned not to need approval in order to remain standing. "No," he said simply. He reached across the table. His hand, ink across the knuckles, warm and certain, covered hers. Jane looked down at it, then up at him. "I want to be clear," he said quietly, "about what this is, about what I want it to be. Siwan, I have been careful with you," he said, "because you deserved careful. But I am not a man who says less than he means, and I think you already know what I mean." A pause. "I would like to stop being careful now, if that is something you want." The restaurant moved quietly around them. Jane looked at Kang Siwon, at the tattoos and the sharp jaw and the eyes that had been reading her since a Tuesday morning in a museum when she had told him he was looking at a painting wrong, and understood that she had been standing at her own gate long enough. "It's something I want," she said. His hand tightened over hers, not urgently, the way you held something you intended to keep. Outside, Seoul glittered on indifferently. Neither of them looked at the phone again. What neither of them knew was that by midnight the photo had reached Harper. Jane heard the knock at 7 a.m. She knew before she opened the door. Harper stood in the hotel corridor in a silk robe over her clothes, her hair still perfect, her face the careful blank of a woman who had been rehearsing this conversation since before she came downstairs. She was holding her phone. The screen was facing outward, the photo. Jane stepped back from the door. Harper walked in. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Harper moved to the window, looked out at Seoul the way people looked at views when they needed something to do with their eyes. Jane stood near the door and let her. "How long?" Harper said, not a question, the tone of someone who had already decided on the shape of the answer and was simply waiting for it to be confirmed. "It ended 4 years ago," Jane said, "before you and Marcus were serious. He came to me yesterday to tell me he was going to tell you. I told him he should." Harper turned from the window. Her face was not what Jane expected, not the sharp cruelty from the bathroom, not the performance of the gallery. Something raw, something that looked, almost, like a woman standing in the middle of something she had been quietly afraid of for a long time. "Did you know," Harper said, "when I started seeing him, did you know it was him?" "Not immediately," Jane said. "You didn't tell me his name for the first 2 months. When I understood who it was, I made a decision." "You made a decision," Harper repeated. "I decided it was over and it was going to stay over, and there was no version of telling you that helped anyone." Harper looked at her for a long moment. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said quietly. Jane held that. "No," she said. "It wasn't. I was wrong about that." The admission sat between them, clean and without qualification. Harper blinked. Whatever she had prepared for it had not been that. "He told me last night," Harper said. "After you met him, he came back to the hotel, and he told me everything." She looked down at the phone in her hand. "And then someone sent me this. The photo is exactly what it looks like." Jane said. Two people at a table having a difficult conversation. I know that, Harper said sharply. Then quieter, I know that. Silence. Outside. Seoul was fully awake now, the noise of it rising faintly through the window glass. The city indifferent to the two women standing inside this quiet room, with 4 years of unfinished business between them. Harper set her phone down on the dresser. She looked at Jane, really looked, the way she rarely did, without the architecture of performance, and management, and careful positioning. What Jane saw underneath it was something she had not expected. Fear, not of Jane, not of Marcus, of something older. I have spent my whole life, Harper said slowly, making sure you couldn't have anything I had. Jane went very still. I know, Harper said. I know what I've done. I know what I said in that bathroom. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I've always known you were... She stopped. Say it, Harper, Jane said quietly. Harper looked at her. I've always known you were the one people actually wanted to look at, she said, and I've spent 20 years making sure they looked at me instead. The room held that for a moment. Jane looked at her sister, at the beautiful, exhausted, finally honest face of a woman who had just put down something very heavy, and felt the complicated grief of understanding someone completely. What happens now? Harper said. With Marcus, with you, with... Her phone lit up on the dresser. They both looked at it. Marcus. Harper reached for it slowly. Her hand hovered over the screen. She looked at Jane. You should answer it, Jane said. Harper picked up the phone. She walked to the far side of the room, her back to Jane, her voice dropping to something private. Jane stood at the window and looked out at Seoul and thought about gates and decisions and the particular weight of things that had been carrying themselves for too long. She did not know what Harper was going to choose. She did not know what Marcus was going to say. What she knew was that her phone was in her bag, and Siwan had sent her a message at 6 that morning. Just 3 words, the kind a man sent when he had already decided, and she had not yet replied. She reached into her bag. Behind her, Harper's voice broke on a single syllable. Jane looked at Siwan's message. She began to type. To be continued. Part 3 coming soon. Thank you for always watching. Please subscribe so you don't miss out on amazing stories like this. Like and comment your favorite moment. Also tell me which city you're watching from. The link to the part 1 of this story is on the pinned comment.